the ultimate guide to setting up your new e-bike. Riders, welcome back to Sam's Bikes, where you know we only talk e-bikes. And today, it's the ultimate guide of setting up your new e-bike. We're going to do it on the Kenevo SL, as you can see here. But this information will be transferable pretty much to any e-bike. There will be some specific parts about the Kenevo SL, and this will be a two-part video. The first part will be how to set up your cockpit, your suspension, put the pedals on. And in the second video, we're going to do a deep dive into the new Mastermind and mission control. So riders, make sure you subscribe and hit those notifications. Also down in the timeline, you will see timestamps. So if you want to jump forward to a certain part, then you can do it really easily. And a disclaimer, I'm a 41-year-old bike geek. I've ridden bikes my whole life. This is how I set my bikes up, and I do test a lot of bikes. I'm not saying it's perfect, but this is how I do it. The first thing you're going to need for your e-bike is a good pair of pedals. I use Shimano Saint SPDs and the Sam Hill Enduro pedals. And if you're new to e-biking, I would definitely recommend flat pedals because there's a lot to learn riding these e-bikes. And now we're going to put the pedals on the bike, and I always use a bit of grease so when you're taking them off it's easier, and crank protectors. So now we've got the pedals on. Something I always see with new riders is foot position. You want to have the ball of your foot on the axle here. So exactly there. You don't want to be here, you don't want to be there, you don't want to be there, you don't want to be here. You want to be exactly on the ball of your foot on the axle. And also, if you're new to e-biking, I did a video about a year ago of 6 tips for beginners. You might want to check it out. Link will be in the show notes. And I know it seems like a really obvious one, but we're going to talk about seat height. So what you want on your seat height is you want your legs to be straight, but you don't want your hips to rock. So what I normally do is I get the seat height close enough when I do the first initial setup, and then I do micro adjusts when I'm out on the trails. And you're talking about millimeters. You don't really need to move it much. And the next one's a big one, the cockpit. The stem, the bars, and the brake position. For me, I really find it difficult to get used to a bike unless I've really tweaked all this. So the first thing we're going to start with is the angle of the bar. So what I do is I will loosen off the front 4 bolts of the stem, and then I will sit on the bike, and I normally twist them back. And these handlebars have like a pitch or an angle similar to the forks, and I would like to get that in a similar angle, so I will just turn them back just a little bit, and that's just a personal preference. I just like to do that. So we get the bar spin correct, we re-torque those bolts to around 5 or 6 Newton meters. Check on the stem, it normally tells you. And also it's worth noting before you undo your stem to check the faceplate if the top or the bottom is flush. If it is flush, what you want to do when you're retightening it up, obviously retighten the bolts that were flush, and the ones that weren't flush, the top or the bottom, torque them up to the recommended torque rate. And now we're going on to bar width, and this is another really big one. I ride 780mm bars. Most bikes these days will come with an 800mm, but what I recommend you do if you're new to bike riding altogether, don't cut your handlebars straight away. Wait, ride the bike first. To give you an idea and to try and understand what we're trying to get to, if you do like a push-up, or when you're at the gym you do a bench press, you know when you do a bench press, you actually, play around with your hand position to get the most strength out of that bench press. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the handlebar, because it's like a reversed bench press. But definitely riders, try the 800s first, or whatever width your bars come in, and then incrementally by like 1 centimeter cut them down, because the carbon bars are expensive and they're great, so you don't want to get too excited and make them too narrow. And now we go into grips, and that's a massive one for me. I love my DMR death grips. Because I test a lot of bikes, for me the cockpit is really important. So we go the death grips, and these ones are the fat ones and soft compounds. So we get them, and we make sure we torque the bolts up quite firmly, because I have a little bit of OCD about the grips actually coming off. And now we're going on to brake spacing. And this is the distance between your brake and your grips. I really like my brakes really far in, and that's just how I like to ride. And so what I do is I loosen off these bolts, and I'll actually close my eyes. I'll imagine exactly the most comfortable spot for my brakes. And then I'll just tighten them up just a little bit so they don't move too much, but we can still get the angle of the brakes. So I'll do that on my right hand. And then with a tape measure, I will come out, and that is 4.5 centimeters from the edge of my grip. And then I'll go over to the other. Oh, look at that. I've set this up perfect. So I will definitely use a tape measure to get the distance of the brakes the same. And now into the angle of the brake, which is really important. So you get your hand on the brake lever. Again, I close my eyes and I think, okay, where's the most natural feeling spot? For me, that's nice, that feels good. But what everyone does is they set their brakes up on a flat ground. What happens when you're going downhill? Your angle goes down further. What I do is I actually just pull it up about 10 degrees. And yes, it's not as comfortable when you're braking on a flat ground, but what we really want is maximum comfort on braking when we're going downhill. And now we're going on to the contact point where you brake. So this is a really personal thing for each rider, and everyone's different. Some people like the contact point right at the start, but I personally like it really close in, because when I'm riding downhill fast, I actually always have my index finger on the brakes, and I'll be in the ready position. I'll be I call it tethered. So I'll be really much sitting on those brakes. I like my fist almost closed, because for me, it feels like it has the most strength in that position. So the way you adjust that, and it's different with every brake, you either use an Allen key, or on SRAM and Shimano, there's little toggles at the front of the brakes. And now onto tubeless. Riders, please, please, please set your bikes up tubeless. It's better, you don't get flat tires, you can run lower pressures, and it's a little bit lighter. Ask your bike shop really kindly to set your bike up tubeless. And if you bought it online, then you're gonna have to do it yourself. It's not that difficult. There's loads of videos online showing you how to do it. And in the coming weeks, I will do one. And now on to a crucial part of your setup, suspension and tire pressure. If you bought your bike in the last 18 months, there's a good chance the company that you bought it off has a suspension and tire calculator on their website. If the companies don't have a suspension calculator, then this is what I'd do. I would go 25 PSI at the front and 28 PSI at the back. If you're a really heavy rider, maybe go up like 2 or 3 PSI front and back. And with the suspension, I would go over to the Fox suspension website and check out Geordie. Geordie, in my opinion, is like the suspension whisperer, and he is amazing and has really good videos. But luckily Specialized does have the suspension calculator, so we'll head over to the website and fill out all the information. I've actually already done this, riders, and I recommend printing it out because it's good reference to have in front of you while you're actually doing it. And you're gonna need a shock pump. They look quite similar to the standard pumps, but they're high pressure pumps. You're gonna need one with your new e-bike. I use a RockShox digital pump because I like to get it really precise, but you can use a more basic one. So we're gonna put 228 in the back and 96 in the front. And now with the tire pressure, Specialized says 26 to 30 on the back and 25 to 29 on the front. I would say at 83 kilos with all my riding clothes, that's what I put into the calculator. I would say, and it also depends on what type of tires you're riding. With the Schwabies, shout out to Schwabie, the sponsor of the channel, I go 24 on the front and 28 on the back. That's my go-to, but that's with a Super Trail casing on the front and a gravity casing on the back. So definitely 26 to 30 and 25 to 29 is around the ballpark, and you want to play around with those pressures, because what you want to really do is you want to get the lowest pressures you can without the tire squirming. And when I say squirming, when you come into a corner, you'll feel it. The tire kind of folds in the corner, and you definitely don't want that. And also, the lower the tire pressure, you have more chances of getting a flat tire. So if you are getting flat tires, just lift that tire pressure up a little bit. And also, if you've got carbon rims, it might be worth getting a tire insert, something like a cush core. It's just going to give added protection for that carbon rim. And now we're going to do the high and low speed rebound compression for the forks and the rear shock. What we want to do first is we want to zero out the shocks, is what I say anyway. So we want to turn all the clickers clockwise to start with, and then go systematically through from top to bottom. So it says we start off with low speed rebound. So we go to low speed rebound, 4 clicks, and then we go to high speed rebound, 4 clicks. And low speed compression 10 clicks and high speed compression 5 clicks. Also riders, remember, always start from 100% clockwise and turn back anti-clockwise to add your clicks. So now we've done the forks, we're going to do exactly the same procedure on the rear. And unfortunately, Fox in the new update of the X2 changed the high speed rebound, and it's right in here. So you're going to have to get a small Allen key. It is fiddly, but it's definitely doable, and just have some patience. Okay, so your tire pressure and your suspension set. Now what I do is I grab my phone and I open the notes and I set up a new bike, and I record everything. The tire pressure, the rebound, the compression, the pressure in the front and the rear of the suspension, everything. Because this suspension calculator is a baseline. So this is something that we're going to keep on tweaking and doing fine tuning. And I also want to say that there's a lot to learn on these new bikes. And this baseline, unless you're a pro rider, this will be a really good baseline for like 2 or 3 weeks for you to get used to the bike. I personally wouldn't start fine tuning anything for the first 2 weeks, because you want to get used to the geometry, how the bike feels, how it brakes, all that stuff. So this is a baseline, so definitely record that. And it wouldn't be the ultimate setup guide without talking about the 6-way geometry changes on the new Levo Gen 3 and the new Kenevo SL. So what you can do is you can change the head tube angle 3 ways. So you can go slack, middle, and steep. And on the back, you can change from low to high. Now, I'll show you how to do that. So what you do is you actually loosen off these 4 bolts here, and you loosen off this and you take the stem off. And all you need to do is change the head cup, the top head cup, for the one that's applied. And you can either go -1 or +1. It's super simple and it'll take you about 5 minutes. And also on the back, all you need to do is loosen off this 4mm bolt here, either side, and put it in the high or low position. If it was me, I wouldn't touch these settings for the first 2 weeks. I would try and get used to my bike first and then play around. So factory setting is what I would do. So I'd go in the middle setting and the high setting at the back. But what those settings do when you want to play around with them, when you go to the slack setting, it's going to be better when you're riding steeper trails. It's going to be sort of more confident, more stable. But then when you come back to the steeper setting, if you're riding more trail sort of riding, it's going to be sharper turning, and it's just going to be more like a trail bike and less like a super enduro bike. And then on the back, when you're in the high setting, it's the same thing. It's going to make the bike feel a little bit more lively and be able to turn a little bit sharper and faster. And when you go in the low setting, it's going to make it feel more planted and just more dialed. But riders in the low setting, you really need to look out for the pedal strikes and the rocks, because the bikes do sit quite low. So we're done, right? The whole bike set up. We're almost. And a lot of things that riders don't do when they get that new bike is bed in their brake pads. So let's go and do that now. Okay, now we're going to bed the brakes in, and it's super simple. You want to find like a semi-steep hill in your area. You don't want to do this out in the mountains. And you want to pick up to 25 to 30 k's an hour, and then you want to gradually brake and come to a standstill. Don't endo, don't do anything like that. And start off doing it on the front brakes and then repeat on the back brakes. So let's go. So we're going to pick up 25 k's an hour. Get to about 25, and then we pull the brakes on and we come to a standstill without doing an endo. Now what we want to do is we want to repeat that like 25 times on the front brakes and then 25 times on the back brakes. and then your brake pads are bed in, and back upstairs we go. And riders, that's it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed this video and got something out of it. Definitely play around with your e-bike and definitely get it dialed for your type of riding. And don't forget to subscribe to Sam's Bikes, because next week we're doing a deep dive on the mission control, how to set it up properly, and how to ride without a Garmin. I love it. I don't use a Garmin anymore at all. And riders, stay safe out there. I'm going to see you next week.